My pleasure to introduce designer Wes Youssi. Wes is principal and founder of M80 Design, a branding and advertising firm based in Portland, Oregon. Wes is a 2003 graduate of the Academy and was a member of the first full graduating class under my tenure as head of the graphic design department. One of the many things that we share is the deep bonding experience of coming to know Cranbrook in a very profound ways, both as first years. Wes was a first-year student, and I was obviously a first-year artist in residence. Literally our first day together in the studio, professionally anyway, was September 11th, 2001 in the morning. Obviously the day that the Twin Towers fell. 3 years ago, we have kept up via telephone in the intervening years, as well as a number of times where we've seen each other in person, but primarily over the phone. And 3 years ago, during one of our occasional long telephone conversations about life and work, as Wes discussed the problems, promise, difficulties, and of course the payoffs of life post Cranbrook, it became obvious to me that he was a powerful messenger. It became obvious to me that he had given great consideration to the arc of his life, and that the whole host of issues that we discuss on a day-to-day basis here in the Cranbrook studio were playing themselves out in Wes, in his work, and in his life. And it was at that moment that I was moved, really deeply moved, and I asked him to come and spend a few days here with you guys, with my students. Wes stands or sits before us right now, poised to lecture again to the Academy, and I would attribute this repeat performance to the simple honesty of his message and to the moving nature of the time Wes spent with us as a studio. Put very simply, in my opinion, in the time since Wes graduated Cranbrook, he really has put his money where his mouth is. He walks the walk. In his path, and more importantly, in his decision-making, I see many of the issues we discuss in the studio played out in the arc of a professional life. I'm proud to be associated with Wes, and I'm excited to have him share his work with us tonight. So join me in welcoming Wes.
Thanks, Elliot. The funny thing about Cranbrook is when you leave, you're pretty exhausted and you're kind of ready to move on to the next chapter in your life. But when you get asked to come back and there's some time in between there, this excitement starts building, and because I think you start remembering so much happens in the 2 years that you're here that it's almost too much to really take it all in. And so when I was on the plane, I was reading my book and kind of tapping my feet, and I was glad there was a seat in between where I wasn't bothering someone, because I'm a chronic foot tapper. And in the car, I'm laughing a little too long at certain jokes and just having a good time. And I noticed when we pulled in through the entrance, which we used to call the whale tail, we kind of came over that little rise and down into I think it's where all the artists in residence live. And I looked over to my right, and I'd completely forgotten that there's a pond like right there that is stocked with fish. And I remembered it when I was at Cranbrook, towards the end of my second year, I was pretty burnt out and tired, and I took a walk, and I saw all these fish in there, and I have no idea why, but I went back to the studio, went out and bought a fishing pole, and when I was out there trying to fish and catch some of those giant fish that are in that pond, And I never did catch one of them. I don't even know if I had bait. I mean, at that point I was pretty tired out. But yeah, I'm excited to be back here, so thank you. As Elliot said, my name's Wes Youssi. It's great to be back in DeSalle, and the Critical Studies lecture series was a really important part of my time here, and we had some amazing speakers that it was one of the few times I left the studio, and when I came back, I always felt like I got a lot out of it, and in some way was refreshed. So I just want to say thank you to the 2D design department for having me out, and to Elliot, to Amy for all the work and getting me set up so that I could give this lecture. And thank you to the Cranbrook Academy of Art as well. So I'm here tonight to tell my story of transformation. It's a story about feeling more machine. And by this, I mean being more humanoid than human. It's highly likely that you've never heard of me, so I'm just going to bring you quickly up to speed. This is me, in case I look really small up here. This is my bat cave back at home. It's the liquor store down the street where I go to buy candy and snacks when I'm working on projects that go into the night. I went to Cranbrook from 2000 to 2003, and not only did I attend, but I also graduated. I just feel like that's important to point out. I wasn't sure. I came all the way from Portland, up in the Northwest, and this is not what it looks like on a regular day. It's usually rainy and overcast. Pretty certain this photo is photoshopped. We have a lot of great microbrews out there, so come visit. And we have Powell's Books, which is one of my favorite places in town. It's one of the largest bookstores that I've ever been to. I think it's got 3 or 4 stories of books, and I don't even know how many square feet it is. I currently run a design studio called M80, which I had the vision to start in the country's worst economic times since the Depression. These are our criminal profiles that we had commissioned by an FBI sketch artist for our business cards. We introduce ourselves to our clients as suspicious persons. Does anybody know what this slide's from? The movie? Mm-hmm. This is I was raised on Better Off Dead. I had an older brother who was about 7 years older than I was, and I think most of what I learned in life in my early years was from this movie. The character on the left here, let's see if I can, right here is Charles DeMar, and he's kind of the Sooth of the movie. And the character on the right here, Lane, regularly goes to him for advice. And Charles has this great quote where he says, "I've been going to this high school for 7 years. I'm no dummy." When Elliot asked me to come speak at Cranbrook, I thought to myself, am I that guy? I think most people that give talks are typically popular and outwardly successful. In my mind, I feel sometimes more like an outsider. I tend to run in the mud. But then I thought, exactly, that's the whole point. In the 60s civil rights movement, there were these great posters that said, "I'm a man, and I'm somebody." That's the story that I'm here to share with you tonight. I think it's relevant to your journey now and after Cranbrook. I've had 10 years to reflect on the grad school experience and contemplate its meaning. During the process of trying to come to grips with some of these questions, I've gotten pretty frustrated, or I had gotten pretty frustrated, and became a bitter humanoid. But eventually I came around and started to have some fun. because I started being me. But to get to this point, I had to confront some dragons, which were my fears and failures. So over the next few slides, I'm going to share some of the things I've learned the hard way. I'm going to share my big failures and what I learned from them. Failure number one was having no self-worth. I'm originally from the Midwest. I was born in Chicago and was raised out in rural Boone County of Belvidere, Illinois. And in the mid-'80s, my family moved from the country, basically, to California. And we moved into a development called Gold River, which had a big sign out front that said Gold River, and then underneath it, it said, a planned community. All the houses were the same color in Gold River. The front lawn was managed by the development, and you couldn't customize it in any way without permission. So from the facade, they kept everything looking great. This is another Gold River house. I don't know if you realize these are 3 separate houses. The backdrop to this community were nuclear-equipped B-52 bombers flying overhead, ready to scramble at a moment's notice. So between these and the security guards, it was a fairly controlled place. Definitely not an art community. So despite this community having all these opportunities for families and people, racket club, tennis, swim team, community school, bike trails, I felt stifled. This is definitely some people's version of the American dream, but it wasn't mine. So I hung out in this drainage ditch, which we just called the ditch. And I skateboarded here every chance I got. I was chased out of here by the security guards and police regularly, starting in 3rd grade. And I knew just about every possible way to get into this ditch, from the back, from the side. I think this is one of the first fences I ever had to hop. I was really far from being a troublemaker in my mind, but it felt like everything I liked was bad. My point in telling you all this is that I really tried to fit in this environment, but it had consequences that I wouldn't realize till much later in life. While doing some holistic therapy with someone who specialized in music and creative people, I realized that I had a really negative self-concept. One of the gentlemen that I was getting therapy from had asked me to say the word me, and I just said, me, really quietly. And then he said, well, what's a material thing that you own that you like the best? And I immediately thought of this 1944 guitar. My grandfather was a swing guitar player. And he said, well, that's interesting because when you talk about this guitar, you're really excited, but when you talk about yourself, it sounds like you suck. So I realized that I was my own worst enemy. The lesson that I learned from having no self-worth is best described in a dream that I had afterwards. One of my idols from childhood was Dr. J. He played for the 76ers. And actually got to meet him when I was a little kid, like in '86. He happened to be staying at the same hotel that we were in, and he was just like a god to me. He was amazing. But anyway, I had this dream after I'd gone through some of this holistic therapy, and I was on the 76ers with Dr. J, which is, I keep trying to have that dream over and over again. But anyway, we're playing, and I was like frustrated, and he turned to me and he said, Wes, you need to be your own emotional point guard. In other words, I had to learn to say, holy shit, I'm good. and believe it. Failure number 2 is approval seeking. School, as you know, or in school, as you know, we're measured by our grades. It satisfies some deep desire for approval, and we think it tells us about ourselves. Well, school was definitely not my thing. I was terrible at math and barely average in just about everything else. I liked school, but I just didn't have a great memory. So I had no real sense of place, and I felt like I just didn't fit in. Unlike my brother and sister, I wasn't the top of the class. In my mind, I thought that I could be, though, if I just kept working hard enough. Just a little bit harder, another 2%. And despite all the extra tutoring that I got to keep up with everyone else, I still just came up short. So I spent a good portion of my life feeling like a dunce. Eventually, I discovered art and design at Oregon State, and not a minute too soon because my time in the College of Business was very short. My dad and brother, with good intentions, used to tell me, "Wes, golf is the key to business. You should learn to play it." And I'll tell you my first golf story, first experience with golf real quickly. My dad brought me out to this golf course, and I hadn't really ever played or didn't have any clubs or anything, didn't really even know I was there. Just hanging out with Dad, and he gets a golf cart, and we go down the little golf path, and then he gets out and runs up and grabs the clubs, and he just says, "Hey, Wes, stay with the cart." So I'm sitting there, and this white ball rolls by across the road that we were on, over into the grass and down into like a little drainage ditch. And at the far end of the other direction from where the ball was coming from, there's 2 guys that are real tiny at the other end, and they're yelling "Rah, rah, 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 rah," down there. And so I'm not sure what's going on. I look at the ball, and they keep yelling, so I walk over to the ball and pick it up and throw it back at them, and which pretty much stopped all play on all surrounding greens. And a guy came over and says, "Son, don't ever touch the ball." So that was it. I think I spent the rest of the day just driving the golf cart. I learned from that a lot of times people give you good advice, or their intentions are good, but not all advice is good for you. After I got into the design department at Oregon State, my grades previously had been C-, D average. I was looking at having to go home, and as soon as I got in the design department, I went on to the honor roll, which was shocking for everyone. It's funny, actually, the Gold River community paper ran an article, a little community paper that said, "Local boy on the honor roll at OSU." And I would have loved to have seen some of those security guards when they're like, "I recognize that guy." Anyway, I'd like to share this quote. It's from the book, The 4 Agreements. "We have learned to live our lives satisfying other people's demands. We have learned to live by other points of view because of the fear of not being accepted and not being good enough for someone else." The lesson I learned was that groupism can be a dangerous thing to individuality. Because I never valued myself and never set my own standard of success, I lived in the fog, insecure and controlled by fear. I discovered later on in life that to eliminate our fears and be free in life and in art, we must follow the duende. And this is the definition of the duende. Duende is the spirit of evocation. It comes from inside as a physical, emotional response to art. It is what gives you chills, makes you smile, or cry as a bodily reaction to an artistic performance that is particularly expressive. For me, the duende is simply digging deep and tapping the dark sounds. And I often think of Kyuzo the swordsman from the Seven Samurai, whose power comes within, not externally. He's my visual cue or reminder of the duende. Failure number 3 was taking any job. Because I had no value and no measure of success, I threw myself at everything. Growing up, our family motto seemed to be work, work, work. Work was like a cure-all drug for everything. I've often wondered if it came from my grandparents or their experience in the Great Depression because they were immigrants, had to basically work themselves up from nothing. My grandfather started as a janitor. Either way, at some point, the message of working hard superseded working smart for me, and I eventually hit a dead end that work could no longer fix. There's I believe it's a Chinese proverb that says, the harder you try, the further you get. And the Midwestern version of this, as my uncle describes, is a phenomena called leaning in on a dog, which if you've ever leaned in on a dog, the dog leans right back into you. For a long time, I never really understood how that could be, but I definitely got it now. The lesson I learned from taking any job was that though I worked hard, I found myself out of control career-wise. With no end goal defined, there are just some doors that hard work can't open. So I learned to make a damn plan. Plan serves to protect and promote your agenda over time. And I pulled this slide because music is kind of one of my big inspirations, and I started working on some electrical, like building your own pedals, and I built my own amp recently, and there's something about a plan like this that calms your mind and you actually get stuff done. Failure number 4 was instant gratification. I thought I would come out of Cranbrook a hotshot. There was a time where the designers seemed to do that, and they would live back, they'd finish up at Cranbrook and come home, and an advertising agency or a design firm would quickly scoop them up, and they would be kind of the toast of the town, at least in design circles. When that didn't happen for me, I crashed. I would show my work to agencies, work that I was really proud of that I did, and they would say, "What the hell is that?" So all those late nights falling asleep on the studio floor felt painfully irrelevant. And that experience always reminds me of this old Indian story that I heard that is a wise man builds a small fire to warm his hands, and a stupid man builds a huge fire and burns his face. I was definitely thinking too big, and in a way I wasn't thinking at all. And the lesson that I got from instant gratification is, like the story says, to build a small fire. I had to consider the power of building something intentional and purposeful first, and little by little let it expand authentically. Failure number 5 is not valuing my time. At some point in my life, I had just lost the value of time. At Cranbrook, I had a lot of time to sit and think about things and work, and when I got out, it was a different story. Time is a premium. It's a currency for big dreams. We spend our young years focusing on expanding, but as we age, it's hard to acknowledge that we're also contracting. And I didn't realize this until I visited the website Death Clock, which if you've ever been there, I think it's a great website, but you type in your birth date, your height, your weight, and some other information about your general health, and it spits out a number that says approximately when you'll die, and then starts counting back from that date. And this is the first time I think I really got a clear sense of time. And I realized that there's no way I was going to be able to do everything I thought that I could. There just is not enough time to be that great at everything. Managing your time means identifying what really matters in the sea of distractions. It makes it easy to see distractions for what they are. And the lesson that I learned from that was to get a good watch. This is one of my favorite watches. It's the watch that the Apollo 11 crew wore when they landed on the moon. People just call it the moon watch, but I don't have one. So get a good watch and use it to focus because time is limited. Failure number 6 was playing it safe. It's the hardest lesson, but with the most reward. I'll just share this quote from the book, The Four Agreements. Death is not the biggest fear we have. Our biggest fear is taking the risk not to be alive and express what we really are. I think this could best be summarized in a story about I was working at an advertising agency with my friend, and we went to lunch one day, and we were both talking about the projects that we were working on and how we would rather be doing our own thing. And very honestly, my friend turned to me and said, I would love to finish or write my novel, but I've got to have my heated seats. And I realized in that moment that comfort has a way of controlling us, and that I felt the same way he did. Safety and comfort are like the sirens in Ulysses, distracting us from our journey indefinitely. And the lesson that I learned from that was I had to get over the idea that what I was planning on doing was not rational. It was, in a lot of ways, breaking every rule that I'd been taught. And that as we approach the jumping off point, there really are no handrails. It's clear that the artist walks alone. So now that we've covered the failures, I'll take you through my work that I did at Cranbrook. When I started at Cranbrook, I went to Oregon State, and the program there was very commercially based. It didn't really cover theory, which is fine. It was just different. When I got to Cranbrook, I got confused and I got stuck very quickly, which I didn't expect. And because of that, I had a lot of trouble articulating myself the way that I had hoped to. But at some point, I just accepted where I was, and rather than focusing on what I didn't know, I looked to what I did, which was music. I'd just like to share this quote really quick. I rap about my life. If I worked at Burger King, I would rap about burgers and fries. The quote by Biggie Smalls was instrumental in just getting me moving again, getting me unstuck. While I was at Cranbrook, I made posters about feeling detached and lost in America. This one's titled, Blessed is the High Life. I made posters about insecure males. This one's titled, My Bullet is My Greeting. And I made posters about not being good enough for golf, this one's titled, You're My Tee-Box Princess. And finally, I made work about eccentrics. And this piece is untitled. And it's important to keep in mind that the whole time I was doing this, I really didn't know what I was doing. I had explanations for what I was doing, but I didn't really know what was going on. And it's funny how a lot of the things that I'm talking to you about tonight appear in this video, which was my thesis piece. But again, I really hadn't put all the pieces together. So I'll share this with you right now.
I've overheard many breakfast conversations, checking out of motels on the roadside. People talking about peace of mind and how they found it. What it means to have finally arrived. As for me, it seemed the harder I'd start driving toward it, further out it was on the horizon line. Then yesterday morning, out on the slab I was packing, came upon me by surprise. Out of the corner of my eye was a breakfast conversation, steaming up the windows of a motel on the right-hand side.
So now I'll get into the 10 years after Cranbrook. Let's start with in our commencement ceremony at Cranbrook in Christ Church, Cranbrook. The Reverend Robert Jones, who was a big inspiration of mine when I was here, he did a lecture, or spoke at the ceremony, and played music. And when he was done, he said, "All right, everybody, nice work. Now get a job," which I thought was really funny. And so began 10 years of wrestling with what's next. After I transitioned back to work, I really had no more time to make anything like I did at Cranbrook. And I distanced myself from it because I didn't think it was at the level of Cranbrook work. It didn't meet my expectations. But little by little, these little drawings would come out of the woodwork. I was drawing during meetings, conference calls, and on just about anything else nearby my desk. And I liked these drawings, so I kept doing them. While shopping one day, I saw this coaster. And when I looked at it, I saw myself. But I thought, I have an MFA. This is not really art. It's a coaster. But I decided to buy the coaster anyway. And from there on out, embrace the things that inspire me, even if they weren't sophisticated, or what I felt was sophisticated. I went back to the ditch, though a nicer version. This one's in Ashland, Oregon. And I spent my free time at night working on little projects which I decided to never show anyone. And I basically made fun of people in my life who I thought deserved it. But in doing so, I started to see some bigger ideas, or what I felt were bigger ideas, but mostly I just had fun with these. As I was doing this, I had some big life decisions that weren't easy to make. I stepped away from being a partner at a design firm where I made quite a bit of money, the most money that I'd ever made. I was doing well by the definition of success. I had a new car, a new house, and was adding toys like Xboxes and amplifiers and lawnmowers. But in reality, I was overworked and really depressed. I would go on family vacations and sleep for 4 and 5 hours for Saturday, Sunday, and I was only 31. It was hard to walk away from these things. We eventually put this house on the market. We custom built that house. and sold it. I also sold my dream car. And some guitars, which ironically I never had any time to play. And we moved back into a rental house with a million issues. And if you're married or in a relationship, moving your spouse out of a brand new house and into a rental with dirty floors and a scummy old kitchen is not easy. And I think my father-in-law really started to wonder about me. This is another shot of the house the first week we were there. This is the only tire on the car. On November 10th, 2008, my wife had told me that, excuse me, she was pregnant. On November 11th, the following day, I was laid off from my job. So my opportunity to work and teach and explore some things evaporated very quickly. This is Elise, my daughter, who was born on July 15th, 2009. And Vivian, who was born on September 3rd, 2012. I only share this because once I lost my day job, I had to contemplate my options. Yes, I could get another job, but I had already been down that path. I knew I could always go back to being an asshole. So I thought long and hard about the risk. What am I doing? I could hear my mother saying, "What about those children?" But for me, there was risk either way. I felt like it's a risk to raise children whose father doesn't really believe in himself or is afraid. Insecurity and fear were not my desired legacy. So I pressed forward on a plan I'd been working on for a few years prior to being laid off. I started M80 Design, which is a branding, design, communication studio. And we started out by making fun of the internet. We do book design, branding design, packaging design, and art direction. And I love this slide because the guy in the big hat right here is Pete Krebs. He's the front man for the 90s band Hazel. And he comes over to the house all the time now and teaches me stuff on guitar, and we do some work together on design, obviously. But it's funny how the relationships that you form once you live more deliberately. You start connecting with people who are a lot like you. And I do all this from the Millennium Falcon, or what I jokingly refer to as the Millennium Falcon, because while it doesn't look like much, it has it where it counts. In between the contract jobs that I had, I worked on projects for myself. And it's the type of things that I always wanted to do. And eventually people saw them and asked me to do some work for them. So this is a park series from Signal Snowboards. And that happened also with Bacon Skateboards in Portland. These boards were a tribute to Ron Decker, who came and spoke when I was at the 2D, or when I was at Cranbrook, and Elliot brought him in, and he was another inspiration of mine. He was really cool to me when I probably didn't make any sense about what I was talking about, and when he left me a book about cards, like vintage cards. Ron was really, I think, an authority on cards and worked at the card museum. So anyway, I secretly dedicated these to him. And it's great to see something that you've worked hard for, somebody else enjoying it. Occasionally I had ideas for projects outside the commercial realm, and I didn't really know where they belonged. I have a curious mind and just always desire to dig deep. So an opportunity for an art exhibit came up at PNCA, and I took it. We built a skateboarding fun box, which you can see this guy's riding on it, but if you don't skateboard, benches, all those types of things are the type of things that skateboarders are grinding on, doing rail slides on, and so this piece that I did addressed skateboarders as an indicator species for freedom in America. In the center is an American flag with skate stoppers. That's those little things right there. They're the type of thing that you usually see that's deliberately mounted on benches to keep these types of people out. And there were cameras mounted on the three walls that kept the area controlled at all times. And the American flag on the box is deliberately painted with 49 stars on one side and one Soho star. Anyway, I continued to enter skate art competitions, and eventually those got picked up by other skateboarding companies. And one of them, this one in particular, they're a nonprofit, and they print the boards to make money for the nonprofit, which serves kids with terminal illnesses. So these kids who have cancer can request a skateboarder to come out and hang out with them for the day. So they liked the boards so much that they said, "Why don't you do an art show?" This was at one of my favorite skate parks in Portland. It's an indoor skate park because it rains all the time, and they threw a nice little party. Despite doing an artist statement for the show, I still felt like, or I wondered, if my work was a little bit light. And then I did these two, and they didn't seem quite as content as the others. I'd like to read this quote because a lot of times when I feel a little insecure about my own work, it makes me relax a little bit. "Don't worry about your originality. You could not get rid of it, even if you wanted to. It will stick to you and show up for better or worse, in spite of all you and anyone else can do." So after finishing that art show, I liked those last two so much that I commissioned a poster by myself. It's a culmination of many years of searching and finally coming to the light. I wasn't really sure what to call my epiphany, but being heavily influenced by music, more specifically blues music, I drew from a line in a book that I read at Cranbrook about the blues. It said, blues is music, blues is song, blues people are singers. What I loved about this is the music is so human, and I love that concept of people. So I titled the poster "More Man Than Machine." For me, this poster conveys human freedom in slaying the dragons in your life. The text on the bottom is my 6 steps to human freedom, which I've shared with you today. And I never could have made this poster without acknowledging my failures. In conclusion, for a long time, I wondered what I got from Cranbrook, and I think this line sums it up quite clearly. It seems to me that before a man or woman tries to express anything to the world, he or she must recognize in himself, herself, or herself a new one, very distinct from others. My name is Youssi. I'm an artist and designer. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I believe we're more man than machine.